Germany's new identity is being remade around a bold 3-2-2-3 under Julian Nagelsmann, a shape engineered to flip overloads into fast, central chances and force opponents into uncomfortable space battles. Watch, because this isn't just a tactical curiosity. Early match data and analytics show higher central shot volume and more aggressive pressing sequences when the system clicks, and that can change how Germany scores and defends at the 2026 tournament. First, we'll show you exactly how the shape creates those overloads, which player roles matter most, and what the numbers actually say versus hype. But this revolution carries clear risks: wide spaces behind advanced wingbacks, vulnerability to quick counters in transition, heavy physical demands on compact midfielders, and a steep learning curve that can cost points if personnel or fitness aren't right. First, we'll ground every claim in match evidence and metrics, point out where opponents can exploit the setup, and give a realistic read on whether this could be Germany's best path to 2026 success, or a tactical experiment that needs more time. A new tactical system. Compactness across a back three, supported by two pivot midfielders, is the structural spine of the new system, and it changes how space is contested from the back to the final third. The three central defenders must split responsibilities. One typically steps wider to cover channels when wingbacks advance, another carries the ball into midfield corridors, and the third acts as the deeper sweeper when opponents probe with vertical passes. In practice, this creates a triangle that both isolates opposition fullbacks and provides numerical superiority in transitional build-up phases. Analysts track this effect using progressive passes into the final third and completion rates under pressure. Improvements in those metrics have correlated with smoother transitions in teams that adopt similar shapes. Wingbacks become primary sources of width and overloads, while the double pivot provides defensive cover and progressive passing, forming a controlled link between defense and attack. Effective wingbacks need the stamina and decision-making to choose when to pinch inside or stretch wide, and coaches often work on triggers. For example, when a winger drifts inside, the wingback should stay wide to preserve the touchline. The two central midfielders are not identical. One screens the back line and wins second balls, the other acts as a progressive passer and sometimes steps into a half space to combine with the two attacking midfielders. These differentiated roles are validated by data-driven role profiles. Heat maps, pass origin charts, and turnover locations help coaches assign players to the correct slot rather than rely on intuition. Pressing and in-possession mechanics are tightly interlinked in this shape, but they carry clear vulnerabilities that must be acknowledged and managed. The system invites counterattacks behind advanced wingbacks and can be overloaded on the flanks if the opponent isolates a fullback with a winger plus an overlapping midfielder. There is also a risk when center backs are required to play out under high pressure. If progressive pass completion drops or turnovers occur near the defensive third, the team is exposed. Explicit monitoring of PPDA, passes allowed per defensive action, turnover location heat maps, and expected goals against in transition should guide tactical tweaks. Do not assume the shape is inherently superior. It demands personnel with specific attributes and consistent data feedback to keep risk acceptable. Practical adjustments and drills make the theoretical shape robust in real games. Use half-pitch possession games to rehearse pivot rotations and two attacking midfield combinations. Implement situational counterattack drills that start from a back three turnover so wingbacks practice recovery runs under fatigue. In match settings, contingency plans must be clear. A simple in-game adjustment is to tuck a forward into a midfield line to form a compact five across the middle, or to instruct a pivot to drop into a back four to absorb extreme flank pressure. Coaches should tie these adjustments to quantitative triggers. For instance, when progressive pass completion falls below a target threshold or when the opponent's dangerous transitions per 90 rise, and avoid making changes based solely on aesthetics. This grounds tactical innovation in evidence and reduces overconfidence while acknowledging the system's operational risks. Innovation and risks. Nagelsmann has built a reputation for tactical experimentation and a willingness to reconfigure traditional shapes, deploying three at-the-back systems and rotating player roles across Hoffenheim, RB Leipzig, and Bayern Munich. The 3-2-2-3 is an extension of that lineage. Three central defenders provide a narrow base. A two-man pivot shields the back line, two advanced midfielders occupy the half spaces, and a forward line of three stretches the opponent horizontally. This arrangement is designed to create positional overloads between the lines and to convert wing attrition into central penetration, while offering multiple pressing triggers for coordinated high-intensity recoveries. Analysts evaluate such innovations with tracking and event data rather than intuition alone. Key performance indicators include pressures per defensive action, progressive passes into the final third, recoveries in offensive zones, and expected goals for XG generated from positional buildups. Heat maps can show whether the two advanced midfielders are successfully operating between opposition lines, and passing networks indicate if the three attackers are creating necessary width or bunching. When implemented correctly, teams have seen clearer passing lanes through the half spaces and improved attacking sequences that start from the pivot, but this must be proven game by game with objective metrics rather than anecdote. The risks are concrete and measurable, and they deserve explicit attention. A high defensive line with only three central players can be exposed by long balls in behind and by diagonal runs towards the channels. Such vulnerabilities show up as increased dangerous transitions and shot-creating actions against if not managed. Wide overloads are another problem. If opponents place wingers and overlapping fullbacks on the same side, the two-man pivot can be stretched laterally, forcing center backs into 1v1 or isolated recoveries. Player suitability is a practical constraint as well. The system demands ball-playing center backs who can step into midfield, mobile pivots with positional discipline, and forwards willing to press and cover back channels. Lacking those profiles raises turnover rates and weakens both press triggers and defensive cover. Mitigation requires a mix of coaching, squad management, and analytics. Structurally, teams can vary in-game. Convert to a 5-3-2 block on turnovers by dropping an advanced midfielder into the pivot or widen the single central striker into the half space to relieve the fullbacks. Practically, coaching sessions must emphasize transition scenarios, recovery runs, and rehearse channel coverage. From a data perspective, set measurable thresholds. If PPDA rises above a chosen value or recoveries in the final third fall, pressing intensity is dialed back. Rotation and workload monitoring reduce injury risk associated with the high-intensity demands of the system. Finally, gradual implementation in lower-stakes matches and specific opponent scouting help validate the shape before making it a primary identity. Innovation should be iterative and evidence-driven, not dogmatic. Prospects for experimentation. Data-driven experimentation begins with clear, measurable aims. Does the new 3-2-2-3 variant increase progressive carries, raise chance creation in wide half spaces, or lower opponent counterattacks per transition? Coaches rely on providers such as Opta and StatsBomb for event data, on tracking platforms like Catapult for physical loads, and on tactical tools that calculate PPDA, XG, XT, and XA to turn observations into objective signals. Controlled training games, A/B testing in friendlies, and phased minutes in competitive fixtures let staff collect baseline and post-intervention snapshots without leaping to conclusions. One practical experiment is adjusting the wing defensive axis. Push the wingbacks higher to create 3v2 overloads in the final third and measure resulting XT per possession. Drop them more to form a compact 5-3-2 block on transitions and monitor conceded chances from wide counters. Another test focuses on the double pivot. Designate one pivot as an aggressive progression fulcrum and the other as a covering anchor. Then quantify forward pass completion and recoveries after loss. Rotation within the front three can be trialed by alternating a fixed central striker with a roaming false nine, tracking shot locations, and expected goals from central areas versus wide channels. Risks must be explicit and continuously monitored. Higher wingback positions increase exposure behind the wide defenders. Opponents who transition quickly into those channels can exploit the space and register high-quality chances. A narrow midfield can be overrun by opponents who create overloads in half spaces, especially if the two advanced midfielders are drawn wide. Physically, the system places heavy sprint and recovery demands on wingbacks and pressing forwards. Tracking load with GPS is essential to prevent injury spikes. There is also a statistical risk. Small sample sizes in early trials can produce misleading improvements or regressions, so conclusions should use cross-validation across different opponents and match contexts. Design experiments with predefined stop/continue criteria that are tied to objective metrics rather than gut feeling. For example, continue a higher wingback trial only if progressive carry rates increase without a simultaneous rise in high-danger chances conceded. Halt or adjust if goals conceded per transition rises beyond the acceptable margin. Use rolling windows of data, 10 to 15 halves across varied opponents, to avoid overfitting to a single match. Complement event metrics with qualitative video tagging for recurring failure modes, such as missed defensive shifts or delayed press triggers. Player selection and development are fertile areas for iteration. Test hybrid players, center backs comfortable stepping into midfield, mobile pivots who can switch between 6 and 8 roles, and inverted wingers who create vertical passing lanes, to see which archetypes yield the best balance of possession progression and defensive solidity. Integrate youth fixtures and club-level data from the DFB pipeline to trial promising profiles without disrupting senior cohesion. Realistic expectations reduce risk. Some youth experiments will expose tactical naivete, and that is useful information if handled as a learning data point rather than a blame event. Tactical tweaks should be paired with opponent-specific contingency plans. If analytics show opponents exploiting the half space with quick switching, incorporate a situational fallback into the match plan. Shift one pivot laterally or ask one wingback to maintain a deeper starting position. Run these contingency rehearsals in practice until they are muscle memory, and capture whether implementing them reduces opponent chances per transition in subsequent matches. Transparency in the feedback loop matters. Share clear metrics with players and staff after each experiment. What changed, why it was tested, what the data says, and what the next iteration will be. Combine numbers with select clips that show both successful and failed executions so coaching interventions are precise. Be cautious about projecting long-term gains from short-term spikes. Incremental validation and replication across opponents are necessary to build confidence without overclaiming. Finally, maintain a conservative rollout timetable. Start with low-stakes environments. Escalate to competitive minutes only when key performance indicators converge, and always keep an exit strategy. Innovation grounded in robust data collection, honest risk assessment, and iterative coaching gives the best chance that tactical experiments will translate into sustainable improvement rather than temporary novelty. Individual player development. Julian Nagelsmann's coaching profile at club level has been marked by a strong emphasis on individualized development backed by data, and that approach carries directly into how players are prepared for the demands of a 3-2-2-3 structure. Players are assessed through a combination of physical profiling, technical testing, and video analysis to establish baselines for acceleration, change of direction, short passing under pressure, and defensive recovery. Those baseline metrics then guide tailored programs. For some, that means extra neuromuscular work to reduce hamstring injury risk. For others, it means cognitive drills to speed decision-making in half spaces. Examples from his previous squads show players being shifted between roles with specific, measurable targets rather than blunt positional switches. Training interventions are very concrete and position-specific. Wingbacks undertake repeated high-intensity shuttle patterns coupled with crossing under fatigue to mirror late-game delivery demands, while the double pivot receives focused progressive passing drills and 3v2 transitional scenarios to improve ball retention and verticality. Small-sided games are adapted to replicate pressing triggers used in the 3-2-2-3 so that attackers and midfielders rehearse the coordination required to displace an opponent's pivot and open channels for inside forwards. Video review sessions use event data to highlight not just what went wrong, but where a player's movement cost XT, expected threat, or reduced pass probability. This keeps feedback precise and actionable. Role examples clarify what individual development looks like in practice. A player who can be a double pivot is trained to combine spatial discipline with line-breaking passes. Think of a midfielder who has played both fullback and central midfield and is able to shield effectively while also stepping into half spaces. Attacking midfielders and inside forwards receive pattern of play finishing drills from half turns and low crosses because the 3-2-2-3 creates frequent half-space opportunities. Central strikers work on pressing angles and lateral displacement to drag central defenders out of shape. Drills pair finishing with immediate transition defense, so the striker's contributions to pressing are quantifiable. These are not abstract prescriptions, but repeatable exercises tied to measurable outputs such as successful progressive passes, successful high-press events, and chance creation from central zones. Cognitive and psychological development is treated as equally important. Players undergo perceptual training, eye tracking, scanning routines, and scenario-driven video tasks to reduce decision time under duress. Leadership and communication skills are coached with role-playing so that, for example, a wingback knows when to signal a central midfielder to cover during an overlap. Data informs who needs which type of cognitive work. Players with slower scanning metrics receive more guided visual search drills. There are risks here. Cognitive overload is real when too many tactical responsibilities are piled on quickly. To avoid that, programs phase in complexity, monitor mental fatigue through validated questionnaires, and adjust accordingly. Reliance on data brings both advantages and hazards. Using GPS, event data providers, and performance analysis platforms allows bespoke load management, injury risk reduction, and tactical training tailored to each individual's profile. But misinterpretation of data can lead to overtraining, false positives in injury forecasting, or the pigeonholing of a player into a single role that limits long-term versatility. There is also a market risk. Overly system-specific development can reduce a player's transferability if the wider market values different attributes. Mitigations include cross-training in secondary roles, transparent player involvement in data review, and regular multidisciplinary meetings between coaches, sports scientists, and medical staff so that interventions are evidence-based and reversible. Finally, practical KPIs and an iterative evaluation loop make the approach operational rather than theoretical. Weekly and monthly checkpoints measure changes in high-intensity work rate, successful progressive passes, pressing success within the opponent's build-up, and chances created from half spaces. These inform whether a particular drill or load plan is producing the desired outcome. When targets are not met, interventions are adjusted based on both quantitative signals and qualitative feedback from the player. This reduces overconfidence in any single method and keeps innovation grounded in observed performance, while acknowledging that every change carries the risk of unintended consequences that must be monitored and managed. Oh, the importance of ball possession. Maintaining ball possession reduces opponent scoring opportunities and allows a team to control tempo and field position, a basic truth borne out by match analyses and modern performance metrics. Analysts routinely compare possession phases not just by duration but by quality, using measures such as expected goals, XG, progressive passes, line-breaking passes, and pass completion to separate sterile possession from possession that creates chances. Teams that prioritize possession often shape the game by stretching opponents laterally, drawing defenders out of position, and creating pockets for progressive play. Barcelona's positional principles and contemporary Guardiola teams are clear practical examples of this approach translated into repeatable actions. On the field, effective possession is about purposeful patterns rather than possession for its own sake. Short, fast rotations can force sliding defensive blocks to lose coordination. Longer, patient sequences can open passing lanes as opponents tire and shift their defensive shape. Pressing triggers are drilled repeatedly, so reactions are near automatic. When the opponent's center back receives facing their own goal with a back pass option limited, the nearest winger sprints to close passing lanes while the adjacent midfielders squeeze inside to form a triangle, creating a numerical and passing angle advantage. At times, the double pivot will step up to support the front line. On other occasions, one pivot drops between center backs to receive and recycle under pressure, preventing long clearances. Coaches emphasize body shape and spacing. Defenders position themselves to invite passes into targeted corridors where trap lines have been prepared, and forwards are trained to angle their runs to shepherd play toward those corridors. These are standard tactical choices, not abstractions, and they are matched to opponent pass maps and ball progression tendencies before each match. There are explicit risks that come with committing so many players high up the pitch. Leaving wingbacks in advanced positions can create exploitable channels behind them if a fullback or center back receives a quick diagonal switch. This is a predictable vulnerability when the press is bypassed. Teams that execute rapid vertical switches or have a tall goalkeeper with accurate long passing can puncture the pressing lines and create transition overloads. Fatigue is another tangible risk. Sustained high-intensity pressing increases sprint counts and metabolic load, raising the chance of late-game drop-offs or soft errors. Tactical fouls and accumulated yellow cards are common byproducts of aggressive pressing, too, which can force lineup changes or conservative adjustments. These are not theoretical. Managers must balance the desire for high turnover rates with the physical and disciplinary costs that such an approach incurs. Mitigations are pragmatic and data-driven. Coaches should monitor high-intensity run counts, sprint totals, and recovery metrics from tracking data to determine when to lower pressing intensity and use substitutions. When possession turns over in the middle third, the 3-2-2-3 structure produces a set of immediate options that differ from more common shapes. Defenders and midfielders must make split-second decisions about stepping or dropping. The double pivot provides a safety valve for recycled possession, and quick vertical passes from the pivot into the two advanced midfielders or into the half spaces are central to productive transitions. Nagelsmann-style transitions prioritize speed without relinquishing structure. The initial pass is often aimed at a receiving player who can either attack a line or hold under pressure to invite a third-man run. This approach relies on coordinated triggers, a forward stepping wide, a pivot splitting, a wingback bursting forward, which create overloads that are exploitable within 3 passes. When the ball is one high upfield, immediate counterattacks are favored but constrained by positioning. Short, penetrative passes into the channels behind the opponent fullbacks are a consistent tactic, and the two advanced midfielders are coached to make timed incursions into those spaces. Press resets are used too. If the initial forward pass is unavailable, the nearest pivot drops to receive, drawing an opponent and thereby opening lanes for the wingbacks. Coaches measure success here with progressive passes and expected goals, XG, arising from transitional possessions, rather than simply possession percentage, and training sessions replicate these triggers in constrained small-sided games. Turnovers in defensive transitions carry clear risks that must be managed explicitly. High wingbacks create vertical vacuums on turnover, leaving the 3 center-back structure exposed to quick vertical passes and overloads on the flanks. Pressing aggressively invites longer recovery runs and increases the chance of committing too many players forward. Fatigue compounds this over the course of a match. Practical mitigations include staggered pressing lines, where one pivot always orients slightly deeper as a counterbalance, and rehearsed third defender rotations where a center-back steps into midfield to cover channels while the pivots recover. Coaches also monitor PPDA and player-worn GPS load to decide when to ease pressing intensity during a match, because sustainable pressing is as much about load management as it is about tactical intent. Training methods and data-led refinements make the transitional model repeatable and measurable. Teams use player tracking to identify which triggers most reliably produce forward progression. For instance, whether a diagonal run from the inside forward or an overlapping wingback produces a higher proportion of successful penetrations, and then iterate training to replicate those scenarios. Drills often include 6v4 overload transition exercises that force the pivot and wingback to choose between direct vertical penetration and controlled recycling. Video analysis focuses on transition sequences that led to shots on target, tagging pass types and receiver positions so that coaching feedback is specific and objective. Finally, the balance between innovation and predictability must be acknowledged. Relying on the same transitional triggers week after week allows opponents to scout and prepare countermeasures, and the model's effectiveness depends on player technical quality and decision-making under pressure. Therefore, adaptive elements are incorporated, alternating between direct vertical triggers and lateral triangle constructions, introducing false run decoys, and training goalkeepers to act as an extra pivot during blitz turnovers. These adjustments are driven by match data and opponent tendencies, not by faith alone. Risks are monitored continuously, and tactical tweaks are made according to measurable outcomes rather than untested ideas. In short, Nagelsmann's 3-2-2-3 is a deliberate push for positional overloads, a narrow high press, 2 disciplined pivots to stabilize build-up, inverted wide players creating central superiority, and a front 3 designed to stretch and create chances. Data-driven signs, improved progressive passing lanes, higher pressing intensity, and clearer patterns of chance creation in recent matches suggest the shape can unlock faster, more controlled attacks. That said, it's not a silver bullet. The risks are tangible. Bigger gaps between lines invite quick counters. The system hinges on fit, ball-playing fullbacks and durable pivots, and opponents can adapt if scouting data accumulates. Small sample sizes and situational variables mean current metrics are suggestive, not definitive. Injuries, form dips, and tournament pressure could all blunt the approach. If you enjoyed this breakdown, tell me which player you'd pick for each role in the comments. First, read them. Like and subscribe if you want more tactical deep dives, and share this with a friend who loves football detail. Stay curious, stay critical, and let the data guide the debate.